Welcome to the Prime Property Finance Podcast with Gareth Morgan and Mark Watts. This unique podcast will dive deep into all areas of property investing finance, going behind the scenes with property professionals, investors and clients. Between us, we have 35 plus years experience in property finance. The podcast has been launched to share knowledge, mindset requirements and experiences of successful investors and professionals. We aim to simplify many of the complicated areas of finance and investing and provide valuable and easy to implement tips. Keep an eye out for our new longer episodes every Tuesday and our shorter ones every Friday. Most property deals don't fall apart at completion. They fall apart long before that. They fall apart in the due diligence stage. Investors get excited, they see yield, they see a deal that looks good on paper, and they rush past the important part of the process. We've seen investors commit to properties that weren't mortgageable, weren't rentable at the projected figures, or didn't align with their strategy at all. In this episode, in the first one of our series, we're breaking down what proper due diligence actually looks like, what you should be checking before you even speak to a lender, where most investors get it wrong, and how to stress test a deal before it costs you money. Let's jump in. Mark, good to see you again. How are you?
Yeah, very well. You?
Yeah, good. I'm excited to bring this new mini-series, something that we've not done before, but something we thought that was quite important to dig down into the whole mortgage journey rather than just individual elements of that, such as valuations or legals, but also strategies that we've talked about on numerous occasions as well. So we just thought we'd take a bit more of a bird's eye view on the journey from finding a property that you are interested in buying based on your strategy, and then going through the process, putting your offer in, being finance ready, getting your mortgage offer approved, and then all the way through from offer to completion. So we thought we'd just kind of break this down. We won't go into super detail on the individual elements, but we want to kind of break it down into a bit more detail so that our listeners can understand that process a bit better.
Yeah, definitely. We've done quite a bit on finance. I mean, we're on plus 50 episodes, but we just thought making it sequential so that somebody could actually follow the journey start to finish, rather than trying to go back and piece together all the bits. So hopefully this will help make sense. And then, as you say, there are deeper dives into certain aspects of this, and we'll make reference to that as we go through the key stages, rather than dwell on topics we've already covered. We'll just signpost listeners back to the episodes so that they can get into the weeds and the detail of their particular chosen property.
Brilliant. So let's get going then. So this is episode 1, and what we're talking about here is due diligence and the deal before the deal, effectively. So all the things that you need to think about before you actually get to the point of making an offer on the property. So we've broken this episode down into 7 steps to try and make it nice and easy and clear to follow. So let's go into step 1. So first step is strategy before property. So what we mean by this is the property must fit the strategy and not the other way around. So we talk a lot about in previous episodes about what is your strategy. A number of people say to us, does this look like a good deal? And my answer always to that question is, it depends. A good deal for you, a good deal for Mark, a good deal for somebody else, a good deal for me mean completely different things. And that's going to be based on your strategy. So those are the things that you would need to kind of start thinking about before you're thinking if the property is right for you. So when we talk about strategy, we talk about, what is the property supposed to do for you? Are you investing for cash flow? Are you investing for capital growth? Are you looking to do a planning gain? Are you looking to reinvest and pull your money back out? Are you flipping? There's many different things that build into that. So just making sure that strategy is important before you get to that property piece.
Yeah, so definitely we've done this quite an in-depth conversation as well, making sure that what ultimately all the way back to the beginning, what's the objective? What's the end game here that you're trying to play for? Start with the end in mind. All of those, the usual things. They sound cliche, but they make absolute sense. Start with the end in mind. That way, then, once you know what your objective is, your timeline, your horizons, etc., then you can overlay the best strategy that fits. There's loads of strategies in property. Not all of them make sense depending on what the goal is. And we've got a saying as we use, whenever we look at something, does it make the boat go faster? Is it going to actually keep you on track to the end goal, or is it going to be a distraction? It's going to pull you off course, for 6, 12 months, and then find that you've just wasted time doing something that doesn't actually contribute towards to the end objective on it.
Yeah. So an example of this is, maybe quite a good idea to be able to have for your investment strategy is what's called an elevator pitch. Now, most people who have businesses and things will have an elevator pitch where they can, if they got into an elevator with an investor, they could clearly describe what their business is and what they do and what they're looking for. And so if you can do this for your own portfolio, that will massively help you create a strategy and then fully understand exactly what your business does. So you might be something like, I invest in student-let HMOs in Liverpool that provide a minimum of £500 a month cash flow. So by taking that then, once you're looking at your properties, you'll be able to look, if a 2-bed flat isn't going to come onto your agenda because you're not going to be looking for 2-bed flats because they're unlikely to be able to create £500 a month in cash flow out of a student HMO. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And I think, we see it all the time, as you say. And when people ask us the question, is this a good deal? I don't think that's necessarily a good deal based on their objectives. What they're looking at is, based on all the deals we've seen, does this represent a good yield? Does it represent a good cash flow? Does this represent a good profit margin, etc.? And yeah, as you rightly say, that is a depends question. There's probably going to be metrics out there that say the average of X, Y, and Z is this. We all know the saying about averages as well. So you just need to be careful of those. So, try not to be too broad with your objective and your description of any of this sort of stuff will really, really help. So yeah, on this, just nailing down what that objective is, understanding your strategy, and just being quite laser focused on it. Try not to get dragged into the whole shiny penny syndrome, which is easier said than done because, everything looks attractive when it lands on your desk and you can see all the pound signs at the end of it. Yeah,
absolutely. So other little things to think about in this, before, in terms of strategy, is your time horizon, your risk tolerance, on what type of deals you're going to do, what your exit plan is going to be, whether that's short-term exit or long-term exit, and your structure. And ultimately, if you can't clearly explain what this property's job is in your portfolio, then that means you're not ready to buy it. So just think about that and think about the role it's going to play. And that should help the decision-making a little bit easier. Okay, so that's step 1. Moving on to step 2, and this is the numbers. And this is properly stress tested. So this is, properly stress testing, not just yield, but all the other numbers that should form part of your due diligence process. Do you want to just pick up some of the points that you'd consider on this?
Yeah, so this is an interesting topic. So we've got a piece of software that we help clients with called PinTech that has a number of these metrics in there. And when we were designing it, we purposely gave the user the ability to control what metric it measures, because everybody measures something different. You could have 5 different conversations on the same property and everybody will assess it ever so slightly different. And the reason is because the metric is quite individual. Again, reverting back to based on the objective that you're trying to achieve. So that's something to bear in mind. So we've got a few to choose from here. Gross and net yield, these are probably 2 of the most common figures you hear banded about. Certainly, if you look at anything that's listed on the portal, such as Rightmove or Zoopla or what have you, and it's an investment property, it will show you a yield number. What's the difference between gross and net yield? Gross yield is the gross rental income as a the gross annual rental income as a percentage of its value. What's the net figure? Well, that is up for debate. So it's your description of what is net. So what are you measuring? Traditionally, it is net of borrowing costs. So what is the net difference after your mortgage? Then you take that, annualize that, and then divide that by the gross value. Others who are more precise with it may deduct maintenance costs, may deduct operating costs, but ultimately fit into that as well. So just bear that in mind. There is no one strict rule, and it ultimately depends on what you want to measure. The main thing I think with any of these numbers is, irrespective of which one you choose and irrespective of how you measure it, as long as you're consistent in the way you measure every property deal that then comes through your pipeline, you won't go far wrong. It doesn't matter, really. If that metric works for you, then just stick with it, is my thing. So yeah, gross and net yield are the two I've picked off. Which ones are you going to go for?
So my personal favourites that I use when I'm assessing deals are cash flow as a figure. So how much cash flow is it going to give me? One in pound signs, because ultimately I've always invested for cash flow and not for capital growth, because being in South Wales, frankly, we don't get that much capital growth, though it hasn't been too bad over the last few years. But as long as my mind has always been, if the property cash flows well on day one, then that's always give us room for increases in rates. And if capital values go up or down, it doesn't really matter, that the property is still profitable. So cash flow has always been one for me. And the other one I've done has been return on cash employed, so ROCE. So again, we have done historically BRR type deals, buy, refurbish, refinance. So we put money in, and then once we've refurbished and once we've refinanced, how much money have we left in the property? And then how long will it take us for us to get that money back? Now, if we leave, let's say, X amount of money in there, and we've got a 25% return on cash employed, that means it will take us 4 years to get all of our money back out. If we have 100%, then we'll have all our money back out within the first year. And then obviously if you get infinite, then you would have had all your money back out and more, which is the golden goose in terms of property investment, right? But those two are the ones that I've kind of really focused on. But it's also when you are working those numbers, and this, we've talked about due diligence and numbers a lot in the past. It's making sure you've given accurate void allowances, accurate maintenance provisions for the type of property and the type of tenant, planning EPC upgrades in the future, management costs, tax, which is one that probably people don't really put a number in on. So all of these will figure into the gross and net yield, the cash flow, and those types of metrics. So like you said, what is net? So just making sure you put in a lot of different numbers in there to get an accurate reading, because one thing, again, depending on your personality type, and I'm a bit more blazy and a bit more optimistic, it's easy for me to be over optimistic on the end values and the rental that we could receive, and underestimate the time it takes, the cost it does to refurb, etc. So I've definitely had to learn that over time and be more cautious when I'm investing, and running these numbers really helps that.
Yeah, and case in point really is, whether you refer to it as ROCE, R-O-C-E, return on capital employed, I perhaps refer to it as return on investment. Return on capital employed then on a BRR strategy, for example, would be, yes, you might have left 15 grand in at the end of it, but you've needed 150 to cash flow the deal in the first place. So, but the point I think here is, as we said originally, is as long as you're consistent in your measurement and you are including all of the associated costs and everything that goes into it, what you measure is somewhat irrelevant as long as you consistently measure the same thing. Obviously, you don't want to forget some of the costs because that will eventually catch up with you. But I think that's quite important. Things to bear in mind as well is interest rates on borrowing. So whilst that will come on later in the series, actual finance, it's worth noting that mortgage interest rates are not a static thing. They do move. We have been in a period of volatility. We were 5 years ago in a period of no volatility and very low interest borrowing costs. And that's no longer the case. So are you stress this? And you may be borrowing at one price today. Can it still wash itself on a different price tomorrow? type of approach. And we'll go into that in more detail when we get to the mortgage piece. And then the other one then for me is just looking at occupancy levels. So obviously if it's a single let property, then it's either occupied or it's not. So it's quite a binary equation. If it's a HMO, then you can have a percentage of occupancy. If it's a holiday let, again, percentage of occupancy depending on what you're working out there. So just bear that in mind as well when you're looking at your numbers is, are you working on the assumption it's going to be 100% occupied 100% of the time? In reality, there are going to be void periods. They may not be frequent if you're fortunate to get a long-term tenant, but there are going to be some voids probably through the life of that property. So just be sensible about what you're forecasting against.
Yeah, absolutely. And the sentiment here is that the deal only works, if a deal only works in perfect conditions, then it doesn't work, because the reality is nothing ever lands perfectly, does it? So yeah, great. Thanks for that. So let's move on then to part 3, which is rental demand and market reality.
Yeah, well, interesting one. And I think one that definitely gets overlooked, and it probably gets overlooked more often. A more obvious example is if you take holiday lets, for example. So yes, we know that holiday lets have been a very strong cash flowing strategy for many investors, especially through the latter part of COVID and the early parts when we came out. You had the staycation, and it took a couple of years for the world to really find its feet and start to open up and that sort of thing. So people could literally buy, well, most properties would have worked as a short-term let in many respects in that regard, and that's what was panning out to work. That was a unique set of circumstances. We're now in a bit more of a normal environment. Now we're actually short-term let investors are now having to be far more selective over the properties that they take. So why is that relevant for this? Well, the property may work in a spreadsheet based on a short-term let and a certain level of occupancy, but as you say, we don't work and live in spreadsheets. That's just helped you model the deal. Is the demand actually there for this? So if you're saying it's a holiday let and you're relying on tourism, is there actually tourism going on in and around the area that you're in? Are you next to attractions? Are you by the beach? Are you all these sorts of things? Does that happen? So that's an obvious version, but you still get that on short-term lets. So for example, if you're gearing up your 2-bed flat for students, but there's no university or college in the area, then you're probably barking up the wrong tree. And you're probably going to have difficulty with it. So, and that also feeds into, if you are looking to buy something and invest a little bit of capital to get it smartened or spruced up, the type of finish that you're going to go for. Are you going to go for high end? Or are you going to go for low end? That can massively change your budget on there. And are you understanding who your customer, your tenant is going to be, will help inform that decision to make sure that you put the right product out there so that it gets occupied and stays occupied and looked after.
Yeah, absolutely. So number of points raised there. So well done. So just to cap on those is the genuine demand for the particular tenant type that you're looking for, and are comparable rents, how much evidence can you, because these will all feed into the valuation, which we'll touch on later, but can you evidence comparable rents and not being overly optimistic on those? And when are they close to transport links? Is it a good employer base? Is it near a hospital, or is it near, like you said, schools or colleges, universities, big hubs? And then the other thing to think about is, Article 4 in terms of HMOs, and there's other things that will come into that in terms of planning and licensing and various other bits. But there are a number of things that really need a sense check. It's not just I think there's a good demand for rent. It isn't a strong enough case to answer, really. So you need to not just rely on what you see on sort of Rightmove and Zoopla and things. You actually need to speak to agents in that area. Spare room is also another good one to see, how many rooms are available. If you're looking at holiday lets, then speaking to agents and seeing and existing owners and seeing actually what are they getting in terms of, 1, nightly rates, and 2, the percentage of bookings, occupancy rates. Because with holiday lets, you're also governed by the weather a lot, aren't you? Because if the weather's particularly bad, you probably won't get as good as if the weather's particularly good in a certain calendar year. So
Yeah, definitely. Seasonality is certainly a thing in holiday lets. And just, we talk about things such as oversupply. Now, there is a housing shortage. So you're thinking, well, what on earth is he talking about? We got a housing shortage. But it's the right type of accommodation that we're talking about here, not just accommodation. So, for example, you might want a mortgage on a multi-unit block of 10 units, 10 properties that are currently vacant. Does the market actually want 10 one-bedroom flats in that particular area? It could be surrounded by, it could have been a property that was converted by somebody else, was a 4-story townhouse, like one of these Victorian houses, which are ripe for conversion into these types of assets. Converted that in, and all around it then are just detached Victorian houses. There might not be a demand in that area for that type of property, given its location and what it's next to, and transport links and all that stuff. So yeah, just bear that in mind. Not all accommodation is sought after accommodation, and you might end up finding yourself with then hitting issues around occupancy levels, not being able to rent at what the market rent commands because it's just slightly the wrong location. And all of these will then start to filter back into the deal. So just do your homework and say agents are probably the best people to speak to. They'll have their ears on the ground, or their feet on the ground, I should say, more often than not, and you can find out from them.
Perfect. Thank you. So let's move on to then section 4, which is mortgageability and lender red flags. Now, this is probably an area that we kind of spend a lot of the time having conversations with people. They come to us, they've found a property that looks like a really good deal. And the reason it's a really good deal is because it's probably got some sort of issue, whether that is a property issue, whether that is a legal issue, a construction issue. So just picking out some of these and try and highlight some of the important ones that we see. What are the kind of key ones that you probably notice on a daily basis?
I'd argue that one of the more common ones is proximity to other types of properties, i.e. commercial. So very often you'll see, if you flats above shops and that sort of thing can be difficult to fund. I had one the other day, which was, a nice little cottage, end terraced, looked lovely. And then when you look to the right, there was a village pub, only a few doors down, but lenders tend not to like anything that can be considered antisocial. With alcohol involved, late night opening hours and what have you, it can impact demand from a property of that nature. I personally looked at one the other day and somebody highlighted something which I should have seen a mile off, as it was next door to a nightclub. But you just didn't see that because when you look at the top upstairs, you just don't associate it with that. So there's that to bear in mind. If it's above a restaurant, again, lenders don't like anything that's noisy and smelly. So obviously the smell of food going through the flats and what have you. The idea being is that it's hard to move on to find another buyer. And if somebody's going to, because the lender's not going to want to sell that, well, they may sell it to an investor, but they want it to be open to the whole of market. And obviously not many people choose to actively live above takeaways and that sort of stuff as well if they're buying their own home. So that's something to consider there. So also we see these developments which you get a pocket of residential, but there's a lot of commercial around it. So you might have yards, units like industrial units and that sort of thing. Again, they don't necessarily like that because there's a limit on the demand that's there for that type of property, and they're concerned they won't be able to offload. So that's certainly one thing. That's an easy fix. Get on Google View, have a look around 360 and just see if there's anything next to you that's got a commercial element to it. Even schools, for that matter as well, got a commercial element to it. Just have a look around and just check off that box because it's an easy one to check off.
Yeah, good. I'm going to concentrate probably on flats, because there are a number of separate things with flats that can be flagged as issues. So the first one is short leases, and that doesn't necessarily apply only to flats. That does apply to leasehold properties, houses as well. But short leases, where as the leases become lower, hopefully now with some of the Lease Reform Act, this will become less of an issue. But either extending the lease or buying it potentially on a house can become a costly exercise. So that's just something to bear in mind. If you are buying a flat, it is likely to be leasehold. If it's a freehold flat, then that's also an issue. So that's a separate issue. So that's one of the main ones to look at with flats. Also, studio flat sizes. And there's just doesn't also apply to studio flats, also one bed flats. The minimum space standards generally that most lenders would like is anything 25 square meters or above. Some are 30. Now they will consider smaller, but that would, probably in London, outside of London, it becomes an issue. So that becomes something to bear in mind, is the actual size of it. Where blocks were built with density in mind for a return, that causes problems for an individual sale. There's also been the cladding concerns around Grenfell, post-Grenfell. So lots of tower blocks now have those cladding. They need an EWS1 form. And again, that comes with mortgage issues if all the correct forms are not in place, if there's remedial works that need to be done. We've got a number of clients that have properties which are unmortgageable because of this until the cladding is sorted. And the other one is ex-local authority blocks, for instance. If the lender thinks that the block is still majority in ownership of local authority or housing association, they don't particularly like that for mortgage to residential or buy-to-let landlords when there's over a certain percentage. And then you've got things like deck access, lifts, all of these various other construction types to do with flats. So flats does come with more red flags than your standard property, I would suggest. So if you are looking to buy a flat, there are lots of things to consider.
If you are looking to buy a flat, there's lots of houses to consider, is what you're saying, is it?
That's it, yeah. Unless you buy the block.
Yeah, exactly. You're in control. So yeah, no, and these are the things that do get overlooked, and it's really hard to remember to pick on every single thing that could be a consideration on these things as well. And you can often find these out at valuation. So yeah, just to have your wits about you is a thing. There's loads more we can talk about. So we're coming on to planning in a bit, so we won't dwell on that. EPCs, it's a topic. We know it's been kicked down the road a little bit further again, but still EPCs are a thing. So we just need to be mindful of what that actually looks like. The other things are flying freeholds. So for those who are unfamiliar with what a flying freehold is, best way to describe it, if you've got two houses together and you've got, they are terraced or joined, then they've got an alleyway that goes through so you can get through to the back. And the houses are built over the top of it, so there's no ground floor effectively. They're flying freeholds. So that's to be considered as well. Lenders will only accept certain percentages of those being flying freeholds on that front. And then we've got title restrictions. So this, again, will probably come out more on the legal side of things when we get to that episode, but they are something to be aware of. You can buy the title documents from HM Land Registry and have a look at it and get it looked over very early with a solicitor to avoid any costly sort of things to fix during the process. So again, that's not an exhaustive list, but there's a lot to be considered here around, is this suitable for mortgage? Am I going to run into issues with it? So just, having your wits about you. If it's your first time as well, again, this is not a list to put you off. This is just to highlight some of the challenges. And that's ultimately all they are, is a challenge that you need to overcome. Very few of them that we've just mentioned are actually showstoppers, to be fair.
And I think one of the ones which probably is a flaw in the system a little bit is title restrictions, because I've actually had in the past where somebody's they've been selling a property they don't actually own, and not on purpose. It was going through probate. But the probate hadn't been granted and it was nowhere near being granted. The estate agent hadn't checked. And so they were selling the property, but they weren't legally able to sell the property. We had a first-time buyer coming through with a mortgage. And then after the mortgage evaluation and everything was done, it was found out at the legal stage that actually this person can't sell this. And there's probably another 6 months left of probate to go through. So that was a problem. And so it would be good, but I think nobody really takes ownership for checking the title documents, and generally in the buying process, the solicitors are probably the last to be instructed. So just something to flag, really. So ultimately, the sentiment in this section is just because a property is being sold, it doesn't mean it's mortgageable in its current state. Okay. Great. So let's move on then to section 5, which is planning and legal foundations.
Interesting. Yeah. So we're obviously just talking about a mortgage here where you've gone and identified a property. So we're not talking about development, which is an entirely different planning conversation on the back of this. So the questions are ultimately, has the property got the required permissions for it to be whatever it is that it is? So things to look out for. If this was clearly a conversion from a commercial premises across to a residential, has it got the required planning and building regs as well? So has it been built to spec? Has it got the relevant warranties that come with it? So what a warranty is basically a guarantee, if you like, that the building still has been built well enough that it's going to survive past 15 years or whatever the thing is. If you can't produce that document in certain circumstances, they're probably not mortgageable because there's no recourse or no evidence that that's been built to the required standards. So just to bear that in mind as well. One example that I've got where it's quite innocuous, really, and you wouldn't really have thought, in fact, the client didn't think about it, it hasn't been flagged up and it's been brought up in valuation, is the property which has been let out for 10 years plus, let's say, is a standard 2 up, 2 down property. The attic has been fully decked out, plastered, painted, carpeted, and they've put a makeshift staircase in there. And this was probably done 7, 8 years ago. Now, they've had a mortgage on it the entire time. And it's been remortgaged whilst it's in that current configuration. But clearly regulations have changed. We're now trying to refinance it. It's been valued, and that staircase is no longer compliant with fire regulations. So that now means that we've got to do something, which is either remove the staircase, put in a different sprinkler system or what have you. They're seeking advice on it. But when you looked at that, nobody thought that was going to be a problem until the valuer went in there and identified that they didn't have the right fire safety certificate. So these are easily missed when you're trying to buy a property, thinking that things are as they should be. They've just historically been that way, and nothing's been flagged up in the interim to suggest that it's no longer compliant.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've been getting my teeth into some due diligence on a property that I've been looking to purchase. And it is a conversion of a commercial into a block of flats. And there was basically all of these things, whilst planning was approved for the conversion, has the work been done as per the planning permission, and has it been signed off? Has it been done properly? Does it have a warranty? Does it have the building regs? What's the fire safety scenario? Is there a fire risk assessment? Sprinkler system, installation certificates, all of those different things, is the fire alarm maintained regularly? So there's a number of things that you've covered off there, but they are absolutely important. If the properties are already let, do they have EICRs? Is all the fire, all the most recent, does it have an EPC? All of these things, is everything in place? Because the moment you purchase that property, the liability falls on you. And if there's anything historic, then you need to pick up that mess. So you want to try and get through as much of this stuff up front before you buy any liabilities, effectively, because that's what you'll be doing. And just because someone's got planning approval, that doesn't mean that the lender will approve lending against it. And that's the key sentiment here.
Yeah, and people complain about the legal process being slow and cumbersome, and yet it is ripe for disruption, and we do get frustrated with it from time to time. Well, probably more than from time, to be fair. But it's there ultimately to protect the lender, obviously, but it's there to protect you as a buyer. If you went and bought that cash without a solicitor and just shook hands on it, goodness knows what it is that you're actually going to end up, when you lift up the lid on the box to find out what's in there. It could be you could have bought an absolute mess. So the solicitor's there to ultimately protect you from these things which you can't see with the naked eye, and you need somebody who knows what they're talking about and looking for to go and identify the risks, and then there's a decision on your part then whether you're happy with that level of risk. As I say, often these are not showstoppers, they're just something that needs to be addressed. Some of these things you can get indemnity policies for as well. So if it hasn't been built with the appropriate building reg sign off and it's 20 years ago type thing, and it's still been standing there, etc., there's a high probability you can get an indemnity policy that protects both the lender and you from that risk, and so on and so forth. So, as I say, we rely heavily on the solicitors, and we have no choice because they're there ultimately, as I say, to gatekeep the system and protect you as the buyer and the lender.
Yeah, great points. Thank you. So let's move it on again then to step 6, which is the exit strategy. And this is to plan in your exit before you even get into the property and buy it. And if I'll kind of answer some of these, because I've been thinking again a little bit about myself recently, is, if I'm going to purchase something, you might, be getting a really good deal and you might be buying with cash or a bridging finance. And then you think, well, how am I going to exit that? So how am I going to repay that initial loan? So how will I refinance? And what's the lender appetite for that type of property, that type of security, that type of tenant profile, and what will that look like? If I'm buying this now and it's got some quirks around it, is there going to be demand for other people to buy this from me in the future? And though, if I'm getting a good deal because it's a limited market and it's an investor market and there's not many investors around that want this type of deal, that doesn't necessarily mean once I bought it that there's going to be loads more other people that are going to be interested in buying it. So that's going to have a limit to it. So that's just bearing that in mind. And again, not being over optimistic about the end values. Am I able to release liquidity from it in the future? And what is not only the demand if I wanted to sell it in the future, what's the lending appetite going to be? Are lenders leaning more into this market at the moment, or are lenders kind of leaving this market at the moment? The lending cycle will go through different phases. If you roll back a few years and you look at buy-to-let lenders for limited companies, there was a very limited market, and a lot of lenders were saying, no, we're not entering that market and we're not going to. And now they're all lending in that market. So the appetite over time has grown and followed the market, but it also works the other way as well. So yeah, just kind of understanding what are your options beforehand, before you get into it, really.
Yeah, and just to build on that, really, is sometimes we see properties that will only fit with one lender. It's not unusual for us to see that. And therein is quite a big risk, because if you don't want to be with that lender for any reason in the future, you're going to find it hard to replace that lender. Or the lender may change their appetite and no longer want to do it. Now, this in mortgages on residential buy-to-lets, it's unusual because when you borrow money on a buy-to-let, you borrow for the life of the mortgage. In commercial, it works slightly different. So there's more of a risk of this. But let's say you're taking a 10-year mortgage, which some lenders won't go longer than 10 years in certain instances. This could be now you may think, but that's 10 years away and I'll do this. But the same points then arise, is there going to be demand? I'll just sell it. All of that sort of stuff falls back into that. So we do see people walking around with just one lender in their back pocket, and that's the only one, and they're banking on that happening. So that for me is quite a big risk. And it's quite a big red flag as to why there is only one lender that will look at it.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Okay, so let's move on to section 7 then. Where does due diligence fail in your eyes? What's the experience you've had when people are kind of doing the due diligence doesn't really work?
Yeah, so there are 2 glaring ones that we get all of the time. And this isn't just for novice investors, it's for experienced as well. Overvaluing assets. So assuming your property is worth more, or this is more to do with the remortgage, actually, thinking about it. But overvaluing the asset is certainly a key thing. Overvaluing the rental income or overstating the rental income, because that will affect the affordability. Now, on a purchase, it's not so bad if you overvalue, because the lender will value the property. It will come back at a lower amount, and then it's up to you to renegotiate or decide whether you want to proceed on that basis. But those are the 2 things that people tend to fall into, is just probably a bit of over-optimism on those 2 numbers, which ultimately comes to bite you later on, because if it's already on a skinny margin, then all probability you're not going to get the loan that you need to complete that purchase.
Yeah, agree. The one for me, when there's refurbs involved, is underestimating the refurb costs, especially over the last few years. The way costs have increased with inflation on materials and labour, it's frightening. The increases way more than inflationary figures suggest. So that's the one for me for people to watch out on. And then just maybe not stress testing enough into increased rates into the future. They use very much the pay rate to stress test rather than what the interest rate might be in the future.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. It makes perfect sense. Something else to add in as well, as you were talking, I was just thinking about was, and this is genuinely, again, one we get a lot of, where people have negotiated particularly attractive deals below market value or, attractive purchase prices, then massively overpromise on the expected completion times. And what I mean by that is, oh yeah, we'll have that done in 6 weeks. And the mortgage process, with the best will in the world, is not a 6-week process. There might be exceptions to that there in the audience who say, I've had it done in that. They're the exception, not the norm. It's a 3-month process all day long. And what that then inadvertently does, or what it creates, the vendor is then chomping at the bit. Where's my money? Where's my money? I agreed this price on that. It creates pressure and loads more pressure. And I've seen deals fall apart where the vendor's gone, nah, you're messing me about, and pulled out of deals simply because the expectation has been managed on time scale. So that is something that I've seen happen quite frequently, actually.
Yeah, and the final one for me probably is around emotional purchases, where people get too emotionally attached, especially for first-time landlords who are trying to make a deal work. They become a motivated buyer as opposed to trying to buy from a motivated seller. So just taking the time to make sure the numbers stack, get through the process properly, and make the right strategic investment effectively.
Yeah, and I think that the point here as well is, and we may echo this later on in this mini series as well, is you may have invested 10 weeks of your time, £2,000 in the process. If something comes up and it's a big red flag, you have to be prepared to cut your losses and walk away from it. It's not something that you're pot committed and you just got to keep plowing through to get to the end. Don't be afraid to walk away. Yes, it's not pretty and it's not nice, and you end up, with a bitter taste in the mouth. But you're better off losing £2,000 now than you are buying a problem that's going to cost you 10, 15 grand in the future. So just be prepared to walk away from something if it is simply too much of a risk for you.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Well, look, we've covered all those 7 steps and just kind of high-level recap quickly and provide a due diligence checklist effectively. And as we mentioned previously, this is not an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination. This is just trying to highlight some of the things that people need to think about prior to submitting an offer on a property effectively. Thinking about your strategy and making sure that's aligned with your longer-term goals. Do a full financial stress test. Making sure that you've got really strong rental comparables and they've been verified by external sources. Making sure that the property is a suitable security for a lender. Planning and compliance stuff is in place and making sure that that's all been verified as well and evidenced. I think that's an important part. You've got a clear exit strategy, and then also making sure that you've got some sort of risk buffer in place for the future. So yeah, I guess that was a great start to this mini series. Anything from you, Mark, before we kind of wrap up?
No, not at all. I think we cover what we need to in this episode. There's plenty more to cover, which we'll do in the next one. So try not to take our own wind out of our own sails.
Yeah, absolutely. So the end, to end this one off really is just kind of making sure that once you've done proper due diligence and confirmed the deal works in principle, the next stage is getting finance ready. And this is where a lot of investors realize they've jumped ahead. In the next episode, we'll break down how to prepare your finance properly before you commit to buying the property. Thanks, Mark. Good to catch up with you, and see you on the next episode.
Absolutely. See you in a bit. Take care.
Due diligence isn't the exciting part of investing, but it's the part that determines where your portfolio grows smoothly or becomes stressful. Slow down here and everything else becomes easier. Don't skip the gears. So hopefully you enjoyed that episode, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks for listening. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. We hope you have learned something and have some tips to take away. We'd be very grateful if you enjoyed the show. You could give us a review and share with anyone that you know that may be interested. And of course, subscribe to the show so you can get notified when a new episode is released. If you'd like us to answer any questions or go deeper on a specific topic, please drop us a message at primeproperty.finance. See you on the next episode.